Welcome to Bible Fiber, where we explore the textures and shades of the biblical tapestry. I'm Shelley Neese, president of the Jerusalem Connection, a Christian organization dedicated to sharing the stories of Israel's people, both ancient and modern. I'm also the author of the Bible Fiber book, available on Amazon. This week's Torah portion is Mishpatim, Hebrew for laws. The portion covers Exodus 21:1 to 24:18. At this point in the Exodus chronology, the Israelites are entering their 7th week of freedom. In the previous portion, Yitro, they heard for the first time the 10 Commandments, the Big Ten. Sorry, I didn't even discuss those in the last episode because I went on a tangent about the Druze being descendants of Jethro. But if the 10 Commandments are the constitution of this nation, Mishpatim is the civil and criminal code. This section provides a detailed look at the full covenant. It takes the moral heights of the mountain and applies them to the grit of daily life. I'm willing to bet that most Christians have the 10 Commandments memorized. However, I would also venture to say that of the 53 laws listed in this section of Exodus, we would be doing well to name maybe 3. But that's sad. We have a lot we can glean from the listing of the civil laws that govern the Israelite society. The Torah is God-breathed, divinely inspired, and these are the laws God gave his people so that all would be well with them. These are the laws he laid out to create a holy people to worship a holy God. So I think they deserve our time and attention. The detailed law code follows a formal proposal. Before the mountain smoked and the trumpets blasted, God told Moses to give a specific message to the people. He said, "Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." The timing of this message matters. God gives the Israelites their identity before he gives them the rules. He defines who they are a kingdom of priests, before he tells them how to handle goring an ox or a fallen donkey into a cistern. A priest is a mediator between God and people. By calling the whole nation priest, God suggests that their behavior in the marketplace and the home shows the rest of the world what he is like. They are meant to be a reflection of his righteousness to the world. To understand the breadth of this portion, it helps to look at how these 53 laws are categorized. They are not a random list, but a comprehensive framework for a new civilization. Scholars often break them into 4 primary themes: damages and theft, protection of the vulnerable, judicial integrity, and religious rhythms. By organizing society this way, God moved the covenant from abstract mountaintop ideals into a structured system of communal accountability. The laws of Exodus 21 focus on man's relationship with fellow man. They ensure Israel remains a just society. Some of the laws pertain to slave ownership, and these laws have a little bit of a cringe factor for us today. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin comments that although the Bible is radical against idolatry, it is evolutionary rather than revolutionary regarding slavery. Slavery existed in the land of Canaan, even though the Exodus narrative up to now has been very anti-slavery. Still, these laws require a more humane treatment of slaves than what was provided by their contemporaries. In many ancient cultures, a slave was mere property with no rights. But here, God establishes a different standard. God instructs, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. The property language is really difficult, but the fact that the master faced punishment for the death of a slave was a small shift towards justice. This is an early indicator that in the eyes of God, all humans are equal, and it shows that even in a flawed system, God began to plant the seeds of human dignity. Some of the ordinances in our reading portion lay the foundation for Israel to be a light to the nations, and these laws prioritize the vulnerable and the outsider. God commanded, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." Rabbinic tradition notes that the Torah commands believers to love the stranger in 36 different places. Since a foreigner lacks the social safety net of a native family, God personally acts as their protector. Rashi, the most famous medieval commentator, points out the psychological depth of this law. Because the Israelites experienced the heart of a stranger in Egypt, they possess a unique capacity for empathy that must be codified into law. This biblical focus on the poor and the marginalized is not just an Old Testament concept, it is the very heartbeat of the gospel. Jesus built upon these laws when he taught that how we treat the least of these is how we treat him. In the parable of the sheep and the goats, Jesus says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." In both the Old and New Testaments, service to humanity is counted as service to God himself. This is the wisdom of the Proverbs, which also reminds us, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Other laws go into detail about the consequences that play out if a bull gores a person or a donkey falls into a pit. These might seem like trivial details for a holy text, but they demonstrate that God cares about the organization and functionality of the community. These rules teach the Israelites that their new freedom comes with responsibility, and true holiness is not just found in prayer or worship. It exists in how they handle a neighbor's property and how they rectify mistakes. Exodus 23 outlines the three mandatory feasts: the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Festival of Harvest, and the Festival of Ingathering. They were pilgrimage feasts, meaning every male was commanded to travel to the presence of God with an offering. These festivals were tied to the agricultural cycle, ensuring the Israelites remained physically and spiritually connected to God as their provider. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Passover, was designed to be a 7-day festival to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. For a week, no leaven was to be found in their homes. It reminded the people of the haste with which they left slavery. They didn't even have time for their bread to rise. The Festival of Harvest, later known as Shavuot, occurred 50 days after the first grain was cut, and it required the Israelites to bring the first fruits of their labor from the field to God. The Festival of Ingathering is known today as Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and this happened at the end of the year when the final crops were gathered. It was a time of thanksgiving for the total harvest and a reminder of the years spent living in temporary shelters in the wilderness. While these feasts were specific to the national identity of Israel, the Sabbath carries a different weight. Exodus 23:12 makes it clear that the Sabbath is a rhythm of creation intended for everyone. It specifically names the slave, the foreigner, and even the ox and donkey. The responsibility to guard the Sabbath, to maintain its legal boundaries and sanctity, was given to the Jews as a sign of their covenant. However, the invitation to rest and worship is a gift for all of humanity. This is a crucial distinction for Christians to keep in mind. While non-Jews may not be under the same covenantal obligation to keep the Jewish Sabbath laws, they are invited into the same divine rest. It's a reminder that no one is meant to be a permanent machine of productivity. Even the foreigner living among you deserves to be refreshed and reconnect with our Creator. The principle of rest extends even to the earth itself through the Shemitah, or the 7-year land Sabbath. For 2,000 years of exile, this law was impossible to practice as a national body. But today, its return in modern Israel allows for unique safeguarding of the land's health and a recognition that the earth ultimately belongs to God. Finally, this seemingly isolated command not to cook a young goat in its mother's milk is the foundation for the complex laws of kashrut. By ensuring that the source of life, milk, is never used to prepare the victim of death, the meat, this law instills a deep sense of reverence for the boundaries between life and death. For a kosher Jew, though, this one sentence dictates the separation of meat and dairy in every meal, turning the act of eating into a constant spiritual exercise. When Moses first shared the laws with the elders, the people responded with a single thunderous voice, "Everything the Lord has spoken, we will do." Later, after Moses wrote everything down in the Book of the Covenant and read it aloud, they repeated their promise with even more conviction. They said, "We will do and we will listen." This is significant because it shows their willingness to commit to the action first, trusting that the understanding and listening would follow. They weren't waiting for a full explanation of every detail before they started living it out. The acceptance of the covenant was unanimous. The Israelites didn't just sign up for the grand abstract ideas. They accepted the specific gritty rules of Mishpatim. They understood that being a holy nation meant inviting God into the most mundane corners of their lives. At the conclusion of this covenant ceremony, Moses finally ascended the mountain to receive the physical stone tablets. He walked into the thick cloud of God's glory and remained there for 40 days and 40 nights. It was the ultimate Sinai moment, a period of intense communion that would change the course of history forever. May we today look for our own Sinai moments, where we stop just watching from a distance and choose to enter into the cloud ourselves. Join me next week for another Exodus reading. I hope Bible Fiber can be of use to you if in 2026 you are committed to going into God's Word with discipline and regularity. Shabbat Shalom and Am Israel Chai.